Welcome back to Investing Talk podcast. This is where we sift through your source material, uncover the most important insights, and help you get informed quickly and thoroughly. Today, we're looking into a pretty interesting company called Northern Dynasty Minerals. You might know it by its ticker symbol. We're going to explore its upcoming earnings report, but well, as we'll find out, this isn't exactly your typical earnings analysis. Before we jump in, if you enjoy what you hear, please do remember to subscribe, like, and maybe leave a comment. We really do love hearing your thoughts. And hey, if there's a specific company you'd like us to look into for a future analysis, let us know in the comments below. Your feedback is super helpful.
It's true. What's particularly compelling about Northern Dynasty Minerals is that it's what we call a development stage miner. And that means its whole story, really, it's far less about the usual quarterly revenue or profit figures you'd look for. It's much more about navigating this really complex, multi-layered web of regulatory milestones. So our mission today is to sort of unpack why the earnings numbers themselves probably aren't going to be the main thing driving this company's value. And, what really matters for the stock price. We'll show you how to look beyond those standard financial headlines, especially for companies like this.
That definitely sets it apart right away. So let's try and unpack this unusual situation. Our sources suggest Northern Dynasty's earnings report is estimated for Wednesday, August 13th, 2025. But what are the Wall Street expectations looking like for a company like this? I mean, I imagine it's not quite like waiting for an Apple report.
No, you're absolutely right. It's a completely different ballgame. And it raises a good question. What do you expect from a company that doesn't really have significant operating revenue yet?
Right.
For Northern Dynasty, there's basically no formal Wall Street revenue estimate. Why? Because, like we said, it's pre-revenue. It's still developing. Historically, their operating revenue has been minimal, tiny, and it's going to stay that way for a while. Similarly, you won't find widely published near-term quarterly EPS estimates, earnings per share. They often just default to a very narrow range, maybe -1 cent to -3 cents, somewhere in there. And importantly, there's no credible whisper number, that unofficial market guess. Plus, the company itself hasn't issued any specific quarterly financial guidance. It just highlights how little focus there is on these numbers for them.
That's really unusual. Does that mean they're sort of off the radar for most analysts then? Or are there other ways the market tries to gauge what's going on? And if there are no real expectations, how do we even look at their history? Have they ever beat or missed anything in the way we usually talk about?
That's a great follow-up. In the traditional sense, no. Their past surprises are almost non-existent. Their EPS has consistently been around that -0.01 cents per quarter mark in recent reports. Very steady, very small loss. So you combine that with very limited analyst coverage, no significant revenue, you don't get those formal beats or misses. Those things that can send a stock way up or way down for most companies doesn't really happen here based on earnings alone. If you look at the bigger picture for Northern Dynasty, what's really telling is that their stock price reactions after earnings, they're almost always driven by big news. Things like permitting updates or legal headlines about their main asset, the Pebble project.
Oh, right.
The actual earnings numbers, they become almost a side note, pretty much irrelevant because of that pre-revenue status.
So the Pebble project, you've mentioned it a couple of times. Can you tell us a bit more about what that actually is and why it's so central to Northern Dynasty's whole valuation, especially since they aren't making money yet?
Absolutely. The Pebble project is Northern Dynasty. It's their core asset, their entire reason for being, frankly. It's this massive proposed copper and gold mine, huge potential. It's located up in Alaska's Bristol Bay region. Now, this project sits on one of the world's largest undeveloped deposits of copper, gold, molybdenum, silver, massive resource potential. But it's incredibly controversial. Its location is near really vital salmon fisheries. And that's put it right in the crosshairs of environmental groups, local communities, federal regulators, you name it.
Okay, so high stakes.
Very high stakes. Because it's just a proposed mine right now, it doesn't generate any revenue. Zero. Its entire value is tied up in its potential to one day become operational. And that can only happen if it successfully gets through this incredibly complex, often really contentious regulatory and legal maze. This project has faced intense scrutiny, multiple reversals over the years. Every single regulatory step is a huge deal.
That really clarifies why it's so different. Okay, so if the earnings report itself is almost a non-event, what are the moments that actually move Northern Dynasty stock? What are the biggest drivers our listeners should really be focused on, beyond the usual financial statements?
Yeah, it's fascinating how their news flow is just different. the significant news for them during any given quarter. It rarely involves operational results, not like a typical company. Instead, any real catalysts, the things that move the stock, consistently center on progress or setbacks for the Pebble project's permitting,
Yeah.
or ongoing lawsuits the company's involved in, and crucially, actions taken by U.S. federal and state regulatory bodies.
Like the EPA.
Exactly, the Environmental Protection Agency or the Army Corps of Engineers.
Yeah.
Those are the big players. These are the events that actually shape how the market feels about the company and demonstrably move the stock price. Just think about the sheer number of environmental permits needed, the appeals processes, the different federal agencies involved, state-level stuff, even local politics.
It sounds like a minefield, literally and figuratively.
It really is. Each one of those steps is a potential make-or-break moment, far, far more impactful than a quarterly balance sheet showing minor operating expenses.
That's a powerful way to put it. It's like building a house, but every week a different agency adds a new permit rule, and anyone could stop the whole project. Beyond these specific regulatory hurdles, are there sort of broader market things that influence a company like Northern Dynasty?
Oh, absolutely. When you step back and look bigger picture, for these development stage miners, sentiment often tracks much more closely with global commodity prices.
Ah, like gold and copper.
Precisely. Think gold and copper. If those prices are rising, it makes the potential economics of a future mine, even one as controversial as Pebble, look a lot better. And that, in turn, influences how people think about financing, how sensitive the valuation is. Broader macro factors, too, like interest rates, and just overall market risk appetite.
How so?
Well, higher interest rates can make financing these huge future projects more expensive, right? While a general increase in risk appetite might make investors more willing to put money into more speculative projects like this, these big macro shifts can really overshadow their tiny quarterly profit and loss statement.
And what about the analysts? Are experts weighing in on these non-financial things, or is Northern Dynasty just flying under the radar for most of the street?
Coverage is pretty sparse. Formal estimate updates.
Yeah.
Very few. And that's exactly because its drivers are so non-traditional. I mean, you'll see third-party calendars list a projected earnings date, sure, but you just won't find fresh upgrades or downgrades tied directly to the upcoming earnings print itself. It all comes back to that regulatory story. Analysts who do cover it, they're laser-focused on permit applications, legal appeals, political developments, not revenue forecasts.
Okay, that makes sense. When we look at the technical chart, the price action, does any of this regulatory stuff show up before earnings? Or is it quiet there too?
The price action for Northern Dynasty usually reacts much, much more to those regulatory headlines than any kind of earnings pattern. While the calendars might point to an upcoming estimated earnings date, there really isn't a documented, predictable pre-earnings run-up or sell-off tied to it, not like you see with companies driven by actual earnings surprises. For people who follow technical levels, sure, you'd still look for recent swing lows and highs for support and resistance on your charts. That basic analysis still applies.
Okay.
Now, normally, options traders use tools like implied straddles to guess how much the market thinks the stock might move after earnings. It's a measure of implied volatility.
Right, the expected move.
Exactly. For a tech company, maybe the market expects a 5% or 10% move. But with Northern Dynasty, that implied volatility number isn't readily available or even that meaningful in the same way. Why? Because its moves are tied to completely different things, like a sudden court ruling or a big EPA decision. Not the earnings numbers. You'd have to look at live options quotes to try and figure out potential price move expectations. But even then, it's far less reliable for this company than for a traditional one.
So putting it all together, what are the potential scenarios for Northern Dynasty? Given everything we've discussed about the regulatory focus, what would a bullish outcome actually look like? What kind of news would push the stock up?
A really bullish case, the best case scenario for Northern Dynasty, would absolutely hinge on some kind of favorable regulatory development, or maybe a significant procedural win related to Pebble. That could mean making real progress in their appeals process, or getting a clear, positive signal from a key federal agency, something that lowers that perceived regulatory risk.
Okay, so good news on the permit front.
Exactly. Since the fundamentals here aren't about quarterly EPS, but about de-risking the project itself, that kind of news could really lift sentiment, especially if it's coupled with controlled operating expenses, showing they aren't burning through cash too fast.
Right, managing the money.
Yeah, if they demonstrate they're using capital efficiently, making real headway on permits and not bleeding cash, that signals prudence and viability. Maintaining their cash runway, how long their current cash lasts, and clearly outlining funded next steps without needing to sell more stock right away, That would also be seen very positively.
That makes a lot of sense. Progress on regulation plus smart financial management. Okay, so on the flip side, what triggers a big bearish reaction? What are the red flags we should watch out for?
Conversely, signs of trouble would be things like accelerated cash burn, spending money faster than expected, or clear signs they need new funding immediately, which probably means diluting current shareholders by issuing more stock. And of course, any adverse permitting or legal updates, those would almost certainly hit the shares much harder than a routine EPS number.
Like a court ruling against them.
Exactly. If a court rules against them in a major appeal, or if a regulatory agency flat out denies a critical permit, that's the kind of news that can cause a sharp drop. Also, any hint of timeline slippage for key regulatory steps, meaning the project gets pushed further and further out, that could also put significant lasting pressure on the stock. These are the things that directly hit the project's chances and therefore the company's value.
Given all this complexity, for our listener trying to stay informed on Northern Dynasty, what's the single most important metric, or maybe piece of information they should really be watching?
The absolute key metric, number one, is their cash balance. And maybe even more crucial, their cash burn rate, because that directly tells you about their cash runway. How much money do they have? How fast are they spending it?
Got it. How long can they keep fighting?
Pretty much. That determines their ability to keep funding these essential legal and regulatory battles for Pebble. Beyond the cash, any qualitative update on the Pebble project's regulatory and legal milestones and the timing associated with those is paramount. Are they appealing a decision? When is a new permit application due? What are the key dates for court hearings? Those are the really critical questions.
Okay, so bringing it all together then, what's the overall sort of leaning or sentiment for Northern Dynasty as it heads into this estimated earnings date?
If you had to give it a confidence score for the earnings being important, the overall leaning around the earnings date itself, I'd say it's pretty neutral. The earnings print is highly unlikely to be a primary driver for the stock. Those regulatory and legal headlines, they remain the dominant path for any significant catalyst. So, confidence score for the earnings report being a meaningful event, maybe a 3 out of 10, something like that.
Low confidence. Okay.
Yeah, and the reasoning is clear, right? Sparse analyst coverage. It's an estimated date and time, not even confirmed. It's pre-revenue. All that limits visibility into traditional financial drivers. Price moves consistently depend far more on those non-earnings catalysts we've been talking about.
So for someone thinking about a strategy around this specific earnings event, what are the key takeaways? What should investors maybe keep in mind?
Well, for the more risk-averse investor, it probably makes sense to avoid holding Northern Dynasty shares through the earnings release if you're not expecting much new info from the numbers themselves. Your best bet is probably to wait. Reassess after management gives their update, especially on the cash runway and any new developments about Pebble's permits.
Okay, wait and see.
Right. Now, for someone more risk-tolerant, if the options market allows for it, if there's enough liquidity, you might consider a small, defined risk long volatility play. But, and this is a big but, only if the live implied volatility seems clearly too low. Like it's underpricing the chance of a surprise regulatory headline popping up around the same time.
So a very specific, maybe niche strategy.
Very specific. Otherwise, honestly, the focus for Northern Dynasty should pretty much always be on reacting to those major headlines when they happen, rather than trying to time trades around routine earnings reports. This company really just marches to the beat of a different drummer, you know?
What an insightful look into Northern Dynasty, a company where, yeah, the typical financial report really takes a back seat, doesn't it? It's all about that crucial, very complex regulatory journey for its main project. It's a powerful reminder, I think, that not all companies play by the same rules. And sometimes the real story, the real value drivers, they're hiding in those less obvious details.
It really does highlight how critical it is to understand the core drivers of any business, especially these development stage companies with such unique situations. It really prompts you, the listener, to consider what are the true underlying value drivers for the companies you follow. Is it just the quarterly numbers, or is there something else going on? Are you looking at the right chessboard?
Great point. Well, thank you for joining us on Investing Talk Podcast. We hope this exploration gave you a fresh perspective on how to analyze companies with these unique profiles like Northern Dynasty. Until next time.